All right, good afternoon. We are going to continue with our Parsha series here in the CBD. And today I'd like to share with you a interesting idea, which I heard from a very good friend of mine that I grew up with in Yeshiva, Rabbi Akrish. And I was very interested in the idea which he shared about this week's Parsha. And so we shall share it with you all. There's a very famous writer in Israel, Shai Agnon, and he gives an interesting parable. And he says that once there was a melamed, a teacher in the cheder there, and of course the teachers in cheder weren't the most wealthiest or the most successful financially back in the shtetl. And of course, the time came for him to raise money to be able to marry off his children. And of course, he didn't have enough money, so he went to collect from the different towns. So he set out, and he went from one town to another town. And in one of the towns that he went to, he went to find a place to stay. And of course, there was a very nice family that allowed him to stay. And of course, it was down in the basement. And after a long day of collecting, he comes back to the house and he makes his way down to go downstairs. And of course, it's pitch black. And he can't see anything, and he takes one step and one step and one step and one step until finally he reaches this place where it feels that it's quite secure. It seems that he's got where to rest himself. He says, I must have reached here, the floor, I must be here. And so as he moves forward a little bit, he falls down a whole lot of steps. And Shai Agnon, he comes and he says, the sad thing about life is that sometimes you think you've gotten down to the bottom. Sometimes you think you've reached the lowest of lows, only to discover there's still more to fall down. Now, of course, this is the manner in which we have in life, is that we try, we put in effort, we try to achieve, we try to influence, we try to make changes in the world, we try to make changes within ourselves. But we have disappointments, we have failures, we have those moments in which we don't succeed, we have those moments in which we fall, in which we feel that we've made a mistake, that we've done something which was silly, that was inappropriate. So of course, how do we get over those disappointments? How do we deal with a life of disappointment, a life in which we feel that we haven't achieved much? Now, in one of the areas in which we struggle with this the most is not necessarily in a personal area, but rather it is in our relationships as a teacher, our relationship as a parent, in which we feel that we put a lot of effort into our children. We put a lot of effort into our students, those that we're trying to influence. As a rabbi of a community, we put in effort to try to teach and try to educate, to try to be able to inspire people, to be able to get people more motivated, to be able to get people more observant. And of course, you can put in a whole lot of effort. You can try and try and try. And then you feel that, just when you've reached the lowest of lows, you can see how far more you can fall. How do we deal with that disappointment? How do we deal with that difficulty of overcoming? So many times a person could think, well, it might just be in the technique, it might just be in the skill, it might be something which, I might not be doing it correctly. And so we can try other ways, and we can try this way, and we can try that way. But with all the different ways that we try, we still sometimes can experience defeat. We still can sometimes experience disappointment in which we haven't succeeded. And so I'd like to share with you this idea that we learned from this week's Parsha in order to be able to understand it. The beginning of the Parsha tells us, Ve'ele toldot Yitzchak, and these are the toledot, these are the descendants, these are the offspring of Yitzchak. Now, straight away Rashi asks the question, why does it begin with and these are the descendants of Yitzchak? The end, which we have, meaning usually you have that joins it up to the previous parsha. Why do we have? We're starting something new. It's a new parsha. It's a new sidra. Why ve'ele? And the other thing which we notice is that the word toldot should have two vavs in it. So when we read it in the way that it's written, it's missing a vav. Why is that vav not there? And the vav, which is end, is added to the beginning of ve'ele. So they come and they tell us a very interesting thing, that the end, the Eile, and these are, comes to tell us that what we just finished discussing in the previous parsha, we're going to continue to discuss it now. And what is that? Just like now we discussed the descendants of Ishmael, that all of the descendants of Ishmael didn't go in the way of Avram Avinu. They didn't go in a righteous way. They didn't go in the proper way. So too, we're going to see that the descendants of Yitzchak also had a descendant that didn't go in the right way, and that's Esav. He also was a disappointment, so to speak, to the family. And so therefore, when it says the offspring, Toldot, the plural, the Vav, is taken from there, and it's put in the beginning to come and say, well, not all of his offspring were complete. Not all of his offspring did or achieved the manner in which they were supposed to achieve, or according to, so to speak, the efforts or the stigma or the ideal which we would want them to be able to be standing at. So this whole parsha, in essence, if we take it from the beginning, called Toldot, is to come to tell us about Yitzchak and his son, which was a disappointment. His son, which didn't do according to what Yitzchak wanted him to do. Well, that's at least what it would seem. Now, this would be also a little bit unfair, because Avram Avinu, he gets 3 parshias, he gets 3 portions in the Torah. Yaakov gets half a book about him and his descendants, and yet Yitzchak only receives 1 parsha. This is Yitzchak's parsha. And what is the name of his parsha? Just to remind you, Yitzchak, your son, Esav. That's what we're always going to remember, the offspring that didn't turn out according to the way that Yitzchak wanted him to turn out. So we need to ask also a question. How is it possible that Yitzchak and Rivka had Esav? How was it possible that they had the child? Now, we all know the 2 children. Yitzchak and Rivka, they wanted to have a child, and they weren't blessed with a child until they davened, and finally she was blessed with twins. Esav, he was the hunter, he was the person of charisma, he was the person that went out and achieved and did. And Yaakov, he was the simple one, the one that would sit in the tent, to sit and learn. He was the kind one, the empathetic one. Obviously, if we were to turn it, one was the goody-goody, and one was the rebel, the one which went out and did what he wanted to do. Now, we know that Yitzchak was a righteous person. We know that Rivka, she was a righteous person. 2 very good people, honorable people that did much good things. How is it possible that Esav was born from these 2 great and wonderful people? The other thing which we need to understand is a very interesting midrash, very interesting thing. We know that Avraham bought the cave of Machpelah to be able to bury Sarah, and that his children and their children will be able to be buried there. So of course we know that Abraham and Sarah is buried there, Yitzchak and Rivka is buried there, and we know that Yaakov and Leah are buried there in the cave of Machpelah. But there's also something else which is buried there, which is very interesting. And we know that Esav, his head is buried in the cave of Machpelah as well. How did Esav's head arrive there in the cave of Machpelah? So the Midrash tells us that when Yaakov was to be buried, he passed away in the land of Israel. And so all of the family carried him, and they all went to the cave of Machpelah. As they arrived there in Hebron, so who was there waiting for them? Esav. Esav was waiting for them. And Esav says, well, what happened? Why are you coming to bury Yaakov here? The place which is reserved for Yitzchak's son is me. I'm the eldest. I'm the one that I deserve this place here. And of course the family said to him, well, that's all very true and fine. You are the firstborn. But you sold, like everyone knows, you sold your spot to Yaakov. He says, well, where's the document? I want to see the document. I'm not going to let you bury him without the document. So they asked from Naphtali that Naphtali should head out and go back to Egypt to be able to find the document to bring it back. Because Naphtali was the fastest runner. He was the fastest out of the brothers. Now, with all of the kerfuffle, with all of the stuff taking place there outside of the cave, there was a son of Dan, Hushim, that he was deaf. All right, he wasn't able to hear, so he didn't understand what the kafafel is. So he asked his brothers, like, why aren't we burying Zayda? Why aren't we burying our grandfather Yaakov? And they pointed to Esav to say, well, he's standing in the way. He's the one that's blocking us. So without thinking twice, Hushim came and in a very tragic manner chopped off his head. All right, and so Esav's head rolled into the cave of Machpelah. And where did it go? It went and it rested next to his father Yitzchak. Now we need to understand that everyone saw that, and they left it there. They didn't think twice about it. So we see that essentially Esav was also buried there. All right, well, at least a part of him, and probably the most important part. All right, his head is also buried there. And the way that the Targum, the way that they translate it, they come and they say that his head was, so to speak, hugged or engulfed or enveloped inside of Yitzchak. Now we need to understand it's a very interesting detail to be able to find out that Esav ended up being buried together with his father in the end. Now, we need to understand, well, why didn't they take it out? Why did they leave it there? What's the idea behind that? So here we're going to understand a very important detail about Yitzchak, something in the manner in which he lived his life. The Torah gives him one parsha, it gives him one little portion, and so therefore, in that portion we can see essentially what he did his entire life. We know he never left Israel. He never traveled one place to another, not like his father, not like Yaakov, that they went from here, they went from there. Yitzchak stayed in the land of Israel. Even when he wanted to leave the land of Israel, Hashem told him, no, you're not leaving the land of Israel, you're going to stay there. So, Yitzchak, what did he do the entire time? So it says that he was a well digger, that he went out to be able to dig wells. Now, we understand that digging a well to find water was, especially back then, is probably one of the most important jobs which you have, because if you don't have water, you don't have what to live. You don't have any sustenance. You can go a few days without food, but water you have to have. You're not going to live without it. You need it to be able to plant trees, to be able to feed animals. Water is something which is vital. So that's what he did. He was able to nourish and sustain life by providing water to those which are around. And how do we do it? Well, we've got to dig a well. How do we dig a well? So we've got to look at a dry piece of land in which it could look like sand, it could look completely dead. And I've got to take a shovel and I've got to dig. And I've got to dig till I find the water which is down there. Now, to become a successful well digger, you need to have two things. First of all, you need to believe in a particular spot there is water. And then the moment that you believe that there is water in that particular spot, you have to dig and dig and dig and dig until you find that water. You can't give up. The moment that you give up, then you don't really believe that there's water there. That's the nature of a person that digs a well, is that you believe that deep, deep down inside of this particular place, there is water. And I'm not going to stop until I find it. I'm not going to stop until I discover it. And of course, this was the nature of which Yitzchak had. Now, Yitzchak wanted to be able to reveal to us a very interesting idea. And that is that Yitzchak, in the manner in which he educated, the manner in which he inspired and nourished the people which were around him, was in a manner in which he believed in them. What does that mean? Meaning he was able to see someone, and he was able to see the roughness from the outside, but he knew that if he digs deep enough, he'll be able to discover the water which exists inside of him. Now, of course, this was very different to his father. His father went around inspiring people. His father went around feeding people, inspiring them, telling them great stories, great ideas, and he created a big change in the world. But we know that he influenced hundreds of thousands of people. But we don't really recognize or record any of those people coming up later. The only ones which we record are his children and their children, and etc., etc. So he had this unbelievable influence. He was able to inspire all of these people. He was able to light them up, to give them passion and excitement. But we don't see any continuation from it. We don't see that anything was left from it. Yitzchak, on the other hand, he didn't go around from one place to another. He stayed in the same spot. and he just dug a well. Yitzchak's perspective was that I don't need to inspire a lot of people. What I need to do is I need to find 1, 2, 3. Doesn't matter how many, and I need to make a real change in their life. I need to dig a well. I need to move away all of the dirt, all of the distractions which are in front of them, and to be able to discover the well which is inside of them, the well springs, the life, the vitality, the goodness, the inspiration, the ideals. And the moment that I find that, then a person ultimately will be blessed with great and wonderful things. Now, what do we see regarding Yitzchak? Yitzchak had a son, Esav. He didn't only have a son, Yaakov. Yaakov, of course, Rivka said, Yaakov, he's going to be the one. We see that Yitzchak stuck with Esav. He wanted to give him blessings. He wanted to inspire him. He wanted to be able to dig his well. Yitzchak knew that Esav had inside of him, very deep inside of him, he had a great light. He had a great ideal. He had unbelievable things, and Yitzchak wasn't willing to give up on it. He would dig and he would dig and he would dig. No matter how much, he would never get disappointed. Every time he'd pull out a shovel, he'd discover another rock. He'd discover another layer. He'd discover something else. But he wasn't ever willing to be disappointed. He wasn't ever willing to give up, because he recognized that inside of this well, inside of this hole, is going to be living water. There's going to be life. Not only that, Yitzchak also invested in Esav's son, Eliphaz. He would teach him every single day that even though Eliphaz would go out and he would do things even worse than his father Esav, still Yitzchak would teach him. Yitzchak would sit with him, would learn with him to try to inspire him. Now, there's an interesting midrash which says that when Yaakov was fleeing from his brother Esav and he was running out to get away from him, so Esav called his son Eliphaz and he says to him, listen, Eliphaz, you have a mitzvah to do. All right, what's the mitzvah? I'm not so good at mitzvahs. He says, no, the mitzvah, you've got to honor your father. Your father now is commanding you, I want you to go and kill my brother Yaakov. That's it. Eliphaz arrives at Yaakov when he's running away, and he says to him, listen, I'm sorry to do this. I don't want to kill you, but I've got a mitzvah to do. I've got to honor my father. I also received chinuch. I also received some education. So, as he's about to do it, Yaakov, he says to him, listen, you've learned by your Zayda Yitzchak. All right? Now, you know a little bit of Torah. Now, there's an interesting din, there's an interesting law, and that is that a poor person, someone that has absolutely no assets, no money, no nothing, it's considered as if they're dead. So do me a favor. I'm going to give you all of the money, everything which our father, which Yitzchak gave to us, gave to me to be able to live. I'm going to give to you everything which I have. And the moment that I'm not going to have anything, that automatically means that I'm considered as if I'm dead. So you can go back to your father and say, yeah, I killed him. I took all of his valuables. I took all of his money. I took everything. He is goners. And that's what he did. So the Midrash asks, but Eliphaz, he wasn't a merciful person. Where on earth did he receive that from? This is what they say. He learned by his grandfather Yitzchak. All of the years that Yitzchak invested in Eliphaz, all of the dirt which he dug out, all of the disappointments that he didn't let them make him give up, all of that he dug away till finally there was a little bit of light, there was a little bit of water, there was a little bit of life. Eliphaz ends up letting Yaakov go. He has mercy. And why? Because of the efforts of his grandfather that wasn't willing to give up on him. We know in the story of Job, we know that if you want an example of someone that suffers in life, someone that has difficulties or hardships or tragedies, trials and tribulations. So Job, he is the one that you go to. And you read through the book of Job. When Job is coming and asking, is coming and asking the questions, why am I being punished? Why me? What did I do? How? So it tells us that he had 3 friends, and one of them, Eliphaz. Midrash says, which Eliphaz, a Temani, which Eliphaz is that referring to? That's referring to Yitzchak's grandson. And he comes and he says to him, it says that prophecy fell upon him. And he came and he said to Eov, he says, you need to know that if Hashem comes and punishes a person, It's a sign that there's still something that he needs to fix up. There's something which he needs to this. And even though, yes, Job, you are a righteous person, you are a good person, but there still must be something that you need to accomplish, something that you still need to do, that therefore Hashem is still contending with you. Now, of course, the question is Eliphaz. We know Eliphaz, he wasn't the most righteous of people. How on earth did he merit the idea of prophecy? Well, this is what we understand. This was the well which Yitzchak dug with his grandson. He dug and dug and dug and dug until finally he discovered that water, till he discovered it never went to waste. It never was considered as if it wasn't. No matter how much Yitzchak could have said, wow, what a disappointment it is. Look at Eliphaz, look at Esav, look what they're doing. Yitzchak never looked at that perspective. Yitzchak never gave up. Yitzchak was never disappointed, because he knew that if he got to a stone, he got to a place, just dig a little bit deeper, just move a little bit forward, and he'll be able to discover, he'll be able to see the water, be able to see the life which is invested inside. Now, one of the interesting things which we have, and that is the difference between Yishmael and Esav. Yishmael, even though we know in the end of his days, he did tshuva, he came and he repented and he came back and he rectified his ways, he passed away as considered as a non-Jewish person. Whereas Esav, even though he went off the way, and he doesn't mention that he ever really returned, other than the fact that when he was buried, his head was buried together with Yitzchak, still we consider that he's a Yid. We can still consider that he's a Jew. Not a good Jew, but he's still considered a Jew. We know also that from Esav, there were many great descendants, many great people, like Onkelos, Avtalion, many great people that rejoined, they converted back to Judaism because they were the descendants of Esav. How did they merit that? So this is where we understand the difference between Avraham and Yitzchak. Avraham went about shining light from above. Avraham went about inspiring people, giving them moving talks, giving them moving experiences, things which they would remember for their entire lives. But there was only one problem, is being that it didn't come from them, being that it wasn't something which they achieved, it wasn't something which they developed. So therefore there was nothing ever left of it. It was an experience, it was emotional, it had an impression on them, it left its mark, but they didn't change themselves. Whereas Yitzchak, he went about digging wells, he went about discovering, he went about revealing to the person who they really are, being and investing in each and every individual that he came in contact with. So it's a lot more difficult. Someone can inspire 1,000 people and get them all talking and motivated. Or I can make a difference, and a real difference in one person's life. When I make that difference in one person's life, I discover that that influence has for many generations afterwards. It's here that I reveal from below, I reveal within the person itself who they are, what they're capable of doing. And this, of course, is the much more difficult thing. Now, there are many stories of the different gold rushes around the world in which there were people that they bought a block of land and they believed there was great gold there. And they dug and they dug and they dug. And at some stage they realized, well, I'm not discovering any gold. And they gave up. And they sold the land to someone else for very cheap because they were too disappointed in themselves and they felt too much like a failure. So someone else buys it. They go to work for a few days and boom, they strike gold. All because the person wasn't willing to take that extra layer of dirt, those extra meters. If only they had enough, they would have been wealthy, they would have achieved much. And this is probably the hardest thing to be able to do, is to be able to recognize and to value and to be able to invest. Rivka, she came and she saw Yaakov and she says, well, Yaakov is also willing to play part. We invest in, of course, Yitzchak invested in Yaakov as well. Yitzchak dug his well as well. He also revealed within his life. And Rivka says, true, Esav, he has great potential. But if he's not willing to help along the way, then it's something which is going to be more difficult. Yaakov, on the other hand, is willing. He's willing to play along. He's willing to let his well be dug. And no matter how deep it's going to go, he's going to help, he's going to move together with it. And so therefore, of course, Rivka preferred Yaakov. But this is where we come and we see at the end, Yitzchak, what was he buried with? With Esav's head. Esav may not have expressed in his deeds and his actions the education which he received, the inspiration which he received, the hard work which he received. He may not have expressed that in his deeds and actions, but certainly deep in his conscience, in his head, certainly there he was still attached to his father. Certainly there he was still attached to where he needed to be attached. It was still recognizable that he was a son, he was a child of Yitzchak. Now share with you, and we'll finish off with this idea. Share with you an interesting story about Rabbi Akiva. It's the first time I've heard this midrash. All right, very interesting midrash, and I think it's a very, very powerful midrash. We know that one of the great sages of Israel was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, he had 24,000 students, and that's where we mourn during the times of the Sfirat Omer, of the counting of the Omer. One of the great sages throughout the entire Talmud, Rabbi Akiva is brought, and Rabbi Akiva taught much Torah. Now, when Rabbi Akiva was younger, it's known that he was a simple shepherd. He was a shepherd that didn't know how to read or write. He didn't have the ability or the capacity to be able to study. And he met a wonderful woman by the name of Rivka. Obviously not the same Rivka which referring to the Parsha. This happened a few thousand years later. And Rivka, she was the daughter of one of the wealthiest people in Yerushalayim, in Israel at the time. Now, she saw Rabbi Akiva, she saw Akiva. And Akiva seemed to be a very special soul. And she, like Yitzchak, she saw the water hidden inside of him, the life, the vitality hidden inside of Rabbi Akiva. And Rivka said she wants to marry him. Of course, her father disowned her, didn't want anything to do with her, because she's marrying this complete ignoramus, this person that has absolutely no knowledge of anything, someone that can't read or write. Such an embarrassment to the family. So she said, I'm still going to marry him. She speaks to Rabbi Akiva and she says to him, listen, Rabbi Akiva, I'm going to marry you, but on one condition, that you go and you study, that you go and you learn Torah. He says, no problem. That's what I'll do. I'll go and I'll study. They got married. And of course, Rabbi Akiva thought, what's the big deal? He'll go. He started to inquire into what does it mean to go and study. And he looked and he saw that he's now going to have to sit and learn Aleph Bet. He's now going to have to sit and he's going to have to sit with all the children in Cheder. And he thought, everyone's going to laugh at me. What is this? I don't know Aleph Bet. I don't know how to read. I don't know how to write. I'm 40 years old. What's the story here? Of course, I'm not going to sit there and I'm not going to embarrass myself. So he says to his wife, it's too difficult. It's too hard. I can't study. I tried. I've sat. I've opened up the books. It doesn't work. I can't study. I'm sorry. I promised you that I would go and study, but I can't. It's impossible. So Rivka, she doesn't say to him, well, Rabbi Akiva, you lied to me. You cheated me. You said you were going to, and now you're going back on your deal. Get lost. I hate you. That disappointment didn't stop her. She didn't stop digging the well. She didn't stop and say, 1 second, you're a cheater, you're a liar. She said to him, Rabbi Akiva, you're a shepherd. Can you do me a favor? Can you find me? I want a donkey that has a ditch in its back, that its back sinks in a little bit. Can you go and find me one? Rabbi Akiva says, sure, just I don't need to learn Torah. I'll find you whatever donkey you want. Thank you very much, Rabbi. Thank you very much, Akiva. He goes and he finds such a donkey and he brings it home to his wife. Says, Rivka, here's your donkey. Here, it has a little ditch in it. Says, all right, do me a favor. Put soil there and plant a seed and water it. All right. And of course, after a little while, the seed makes a little bit of a sapling and starts to grow. And now a tree is about to form there. She says, Rabbi Akiva, I want you to take the donkey and I want you to walk around Jerusalem. All right. So just don't ask me to learn there. I'll do whatever you want, darling. He takes the donkey and he walks around. All right. He comes home and his wife says, no, Akiva, what happened today? He says, you wouldn't believe it. I was the hit of the entire town. Everyone in Jerusalem came to speak to me. Everyone wanted to see this donkey that has a tree growing out of it. They thought this is the most amazing, funny, silly thing ever. All right. She says, Rabbi Akiva, I want you to do again the same thing tomorrow. All right. He comes back. How was it? Everyone wanted to come and see this donkey. Everyone. All right. Another day, she asks. A few days later, he comes home and he says, no, Akiva, what happened today? He says, absolutely nothing. I walked around Jerusalem and no one could care less. No one came to ask me about my donkey. No one inquired about my donkey. She says to him, no, why is that? He says, well, it's very simple. Everyone's already gotten used to it. It's not a new thing. It's not a novel thing. They don't think it's so silly anymore. It's all right. So I've got a donkey with a tree growing up. Big deal. Not a big deal. We've seen this already. Rivka, she says, Akiva, this is what I want to tell you. You're going to go to Cheder and you're going to learn Aleph Bet. So the first day people are going to laugh and they're going to say, look at this old man coming and learning Aleph Bet. The second day they're going to come and they're going to say, oh, this is funny. Look at the old man learning Aleph Bet. And that's going to take place over a few days. But a few days are going to pass and no one is going to care. No one is going to see that it's novel. No one is going to see that this is strange. They're going to accept it because it's just normal. It's already happened. Rabbi Akiva heard this and realized the wisdom of his wife, the wisdom of Rivka. So he went off and he learned in yeshiva. And yes, the first few days people did laugh at him. The first few times people did look down at him. But he toiled, and because of all of the digging of Rivka, because of all of the efforts, all of the not getting disappointed, not giving up, we see that Rabbi Akiva ended up studying. And it wasn't easy, and it was difficult, and it was hard, but he was able to discover that hidden treasure which he had inside of him, all because Rivka wasn't willing to give up. This is the message which this parsha wants to come and tell us. And that is that even if we're dealing with an Esav, even if we're dealing with someone that seems so barren, so dry, so full of rocks, we need to make sure that we still dig. We don't get disappointed. We don't give up on our disappointments. Yitzchak could have went throughout his entire life saying, Esav, why can't you be like Yaakov? Esav, why can't you be like Yaakov? And of course, sadly, many parents, and of course, I also fall into this sadly sometimes, why can't you just be easy like the other one? Why can't you just... Yitzchak never ever said that. Yitzchak never wanted Esav to be Yaakov. Yitzchak wanted to discover who Esav is. Yitzchak wanted that Esav should be Esav. Yitzchak wanted to reveal the wellspring which is hidden inside of him. And it's only by recognizing, yes, we are going to be disappointed. We are going to have the times in which we fall. But we need to recognize that as we dig the well, I might not even see the water in my lifetime, but any investment, any involvement, any engagement which I have and put into anyone, I'm going to discover that influence is going to be for generations. I'm going to discover how well and how good all of those actions of the deeds are. And so therefore, we learn from this is when you're digging a well, you will have many disappointments. You will be disappointed all the way till you discover the water. Don't let the disappointment hold you back from discovering the water. Wish you a wonderful, wonderful day. We hope that your day at work continues and that we should learn from the story of Yitzchak and his relationship to Esav, of how we need to dig our wells and not be disappointed and give up.